This is Health Call Online, the place for extended versions of interviews you hear in our weekly radio broadcast, the Health Call Radio Hour, now heard on more and more stations around the country in national syndication. Kind of a big deal in the world of nutrition recently, as for the first time, there's been a recommendation to take a specific amount of a bioactive element, a flavonoid, because of the impact it can have on our health. And we'll find out what makes this such a big deal as we talk to Whitney Linsenmeyer. She is a PhD, a registered dietitian, an assistant professor at the St. Louis University Department of Nutrition and Dietetics, and a spokesperson for the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. Whitney, thanks for being here. This does sound like a big deal. What makes it so important?
What makes it so important? So it is a kind of a new step in terms of nutrition science and recommendations for following a healthy diet. I think it's important to help listeners distinguish between what we know are the essential nutrients versus what this recommendation is falling under is considered to be a bioactive or a bioactive food component. So the essential nutrients are those that perform a specific function in the body. They result in symptoms or a disease when they're removed from the diet. And then when we add them back in, we see that the symptoms or the disease resolves. So then these bioactives are different. So they're not considered to be essential and that we have to consume them on a regular basis in order to prevent those nutrient-related diseases. But we know that they do have really important health benefits.
So instead of just avoiding a deficiency and disease by taking this amount of this product, of this flavonoid, we're actually improving our health. So that's the big difference, right? The RDA is designed to recommended daily allowance is designed to prevent disease. This actually is an improvement to health.
Yes, that's a good way to distinguish it. All of the dietary reference intake values, the RDAs being one of them, are really set around preventing deficiency diseases. And this is a step towards promoting health.
Got it. So what is this bioactive we're talking about? It is something that I'd never really heard of, a Flavin 3-ol. Is that right?
Yes. So a lot of the bioactives fall into the categories of what we call phytochemicals or zoochemicals, basically compounds found in plants or in animal foods that we know are especially beneficial for health. So some of those that you might have heard of before that folks are fairly common with are things like capsaicin, which is found in chili peppers, the isoflavones found in soy products, or here the flavonoids, which are found in citrus, red wine, and chocolate. So the Flavin 3-ols that we're focusing on with this newer recommendation, this is a type of flavonoid. So one of those plant-based compounds. It's the most commonly consumed type of flavonoid. And in terms of food sources, we see them most abundantly in tea. Apples, pears, berries, and cocoa are some of the top food sources. The reason why we have this recommendation for Flavin 3-ols in particular is really because of their beneficial impact for heart health. So we see that diets rich in Flavin 3-ols help with blood pressure, cholesterol levels, and blood sugar levels.
Great. How do they do that? What are they doing in my body that makes that difference?
Yeah, so they perform a lot of different functions in the body related to the normal processes that regulate our blood pressure levels, our cholesterol levels, and blood sugar. So helping to maintain those normal processes of our metabolism, where on the other side, diets high in things like added sugars and saturated fat tend to increase the risk for those diseases.
Okay. So when I'm eating these products, these fruits and vegetables contain these things, now you finally put a number on it to say, here's how much you should be getting each day. What is that number?
The recommendation that was just published is 400 to 600 milligrams per day. I think it's important to note that in this paper too, this recommendation that came out, they reported what is the average intake right now in, the kind of the typical American diet. And it was about 220 milligrams per day. So
Oh,
I
so we
think
want
that's
a
just an
2x to
important,
3x. Yeah, we're
yeah.
really talking about stepping it up.
Yes, yes, and yet not like wildly, different. Like, it's within reach is how I interpret that personally. So when we think about how can we get there, how can we reach that 400 milligram per day level from food sources? If we look at some of those top food sources, you could easily get there daily with 1 cup of green tea, 1 cup of blackberries, 3 squares of dark chocolate, and 5 ounces of red wine. So just to give folks a sense for it's doable through food sources, and that's why this is a food-based recommendation and not a recommendation to take a dietary supplement.
Ding, ding, ding. My ears lit up when you said a glass of red wine, 5 ounces of red wine. That's kind of fun to hear. And dark chocolate too. That's interesting.
Yeah, so red wine and then the cocoa that, is used to make dark chocolate are one of those richest sources. So that's a good point that we also want to be thinking about, sometimes we are adding sugar to tea, or of course there's sugar in like a bar of chocolate. So we want to think about the food as a whole too when we're considering how it fits into a healthy diet.
So I asked you about this in a pre-interview. I've been adding an organic cocoa to coffee in the morning, believing that I'm doing myself a favor getting some of those Flavin 3-ols. It sounds like that's the real deal, is it?
Yeah, so cocoa powder is one of those richest sources of the flavin threols. There also has a number of other health benefits with it too. It's a good source of iron and actually fiber too. So if you like it, if you like adding your cocoa powder to your coffee, I would feel good about that. Of course, there's also other ways to get cocoa powder in as well, other than adding it to your coffee if that's not the form that you like it.
Yeah, it's not like going to Starbucks and getting something like that. It's an acquired taste, but
I
I'm doing
believe
it
it.
for a reason, so okay, I get there. But you make an important point, and that is we're adding a food product and not a supplement, and that is something that your organization was very clear about. Let's not start throwing a bunch of supplements at our diet with. Why is that the case?
Yeah, so there's a temptation to think, oh, I need to go get a supplement of these flavin threols. We know they have all these health benefits. Now there's this number that I'm trying to reach. But there's a couple of reasons why this is truly meant to be a food-based recommendation. The first being that, like we just touched about, it's feasible to and fairly practical to consume enough flavin threols through food sources. I just listed a handful of here,
Hmm.
but there's many more food sources where we can find flavin threols and get those from our diet. Kind of the other major concern is that supplements kind of pose their own risks, similar to taking a medication. We know that high intakes of flavin threols from supplement form can cause GI distress, things like stomach cramping or bloating. Can also be damaging to the liver when taken in very high quantities. So that's not a concern that we have when taking it in whole food forms. It does become a concern when taking an isolated nutrient in high levels.
Got it. And when you're eating the whole food, you're getting the fiber and all the microbiome benefits that brings along, right?
Yes, so when we eat those whole foods, again, there's all of those other phytochemicals and zoochemicals in the food, more than just the flavin threols, frankly. There's other great plant and animal compounds out there that when we consume the whole food source, we're getting all of those benefits.
So, what about I'm going to shift a little bit focus here on you and turn toward a trend that I'm seeing everywhere these days, and especially online and in podcast world. There are companies that produce sort of a powdered vegetable mix. And you might see television commercials offering kind of the same thing in a gummy form. These alternate sources of vegetable product and fruit product. Is there a good reason to use those? What's the thinking about that?
I'm seeing that trend as well. I was just talking to my students here at St. Louis University. I always like to touch base with them to say, what are the current trends going on? They tell me about what's happening on TikTok. And that's exactly what they brought up. It's kind of the most popular thing right now. To me, when I look at that type of product, I'm seeing this as kind of a way to shortcut eating actual whole vegetables, like green leafy vegetables, in sort of an easy and convenient and kind of a shortcut type of a form. But again, we know that there's so many benefits with eating the whole vegetables that we're not getting from a powdered version. So my recommendation is to put that in the category of a fad diet. I think this is something that's here and sort of in vogue right now. And I suspect that a year from now, we won't even be talking about it.
So not necessarily anything wrong with these products, but it's better to get the real foods. Are they effective? Did they deliver what they promised? Has anybody taken a look at that?
When we look at the kind of dietary supplements in general, and a lot of these types of products fall in that umbrella, the concern is that a lot of them will boast what are called structure function claims. So these are vague claims. They might say things like support immune function or promote health and longevity, right? Like kind of very general. Those types of claims, two things to know: they do not need to be true or provide any sort of science behind them in order to show up on those packages. And they are not FDA regulated.
Right.
So that's why we see a lot of claims, a lot of promises, no evidence that they actually hold any weight.
So from a nutritional standpoint, was just had this conversation with my wife the other day. We were talking about our grandkids, and my wife and I eat a very healthy diet, have for years, but yet we still make pancakes for the grandkids, that kind of stuff. Start them out with a bowl of cereal. That to me seems like we are programming our little kids and their taste buds to a pattern of eating that is putting them at risk for diabetes and all those cardiometabolic problems that we see. Is that anything that we ought to be aware of and do something about, or is it's really not that big a deal?
I'll be honestly, if I was you, I would not be sweating about having pancakes with my grandkids. I think that sounds like a wonderful tradition. And I think that's an important reminder that food is not just nutrients, right? It's not just like these vitamins and minerals and flavin threols packed up into something that's on our plate. So much of food is social, it's family traditions, it's fun, it's pleasure. And so I think that's an important part of a healthy eating pattern overall, and a healthy relationship with food is enjoying foods that, yeah, they're super low in flavin threols. They don't have a lot of nutritional value, but they bring a lot of joy to, a family tradition, for example. So that's part of it, just having a healthy relationship with food overall, that we have room for, those types of treats.
Okay, I like that. So let's not be food Nazis with the kids. That's a good thing. What about the other stuff that we're feeding our kids? Chicken nuggets and fish sticks and that kind of stuff. Should we be concerned about that?
So that's when we kind of get into the conversation of foods that are more highly processed versus, unprocessed or minimally processed. This is another major direction that I see, kind of nutrition science, our field, moving in, is recognizing that there's a wide range here of the degree to which foods are processed. And when we think about, like, for example, a chicken nugget, that would be on the highly processed range of the spectrum, versus, like chicken that's been cooked from fresh form, which is minimally processed. And again, there's room for all those foods in the diet. If your family loves a chicken nugget, have that once in a while for sure. We just want to focus mostly on the minimally or unprocessed foods.
Makes sense. I love to ask people, experts like you, how do you live differently? If I were to come to your house and look in your fridge, how might it look different than mine?
I love that question. That's fun. I think you would notice that there's not a lot of food sitting right there that is ready to eat right away. Like, we do a lot of cooking in our house. Part of that is we love cooking. Like, that's part of our joy and our love language. So you would see a lot of ingredients that we're going to use for dinner that night. Not a ton of stuff like packaged snacks or packaged foods that are ready to go.
Okay. What about, do you have a concern about seed oils? I'm reading a lot in the kind of the health media about stepping away from corn oil, canola oil, those types of products, soy oil. Is that anything that, is that just another fad, or is it something we ought to pay attention to?
So, in terms of fats, and we would put oils in the category of fats, we do recommend more of the unsaturated fats versus the saturated fats. And oil specifically would fall in that unsaturated category. But the concern kind of within oils is that we're consuming a lot of what are called the omega 6 fatty acids and not enough of the omega 3 fatty acids. So I think the reason why those plant oils are getting a lot of attention right now is because they are, for two reasons. They're very rich in the omega 6 fatty acids. And we also see them just used a lot in processed foods. If we think about chips, a lot of times they might be like fried in, a corn oil or a sunflower oil. And so the concern is not that we're eating them. We need those omega 6s as part of a healthy diet. The concern is with the balance of the omega 6s and the omega 3s.
So the omega 6s are thought to be more inflammatory, is what I keep reading. And so
Yes.
therefore you want to have that balance.
Versus the omega 3s, which are very anti-inflammatory. And we see those omega 3s in different food sources, more like fatty fish. And that's why, honestly, there's just more like abundant omega 6s in our food supply than there are omega 3s. And I think that's part of why we have sort of this imbalance right now in many people's diets.
One last question about the microbiome. It's a topic we've covered pretty extensively on the program in previous episodes. Where do you think the most interesting changes in our diet are going to come from, and how soon are we going to see those impacts if we start changing the way we eat?
In terms of the microbiome, we see so much overlap here with what we've been talking about already with how to support a healthy microbiome through foods. A lot of plant-based foods, things like vegetables and fruits in particular, are going to provide a lot of what are called the prebiotic fibers, those that basically serve as a really good food source for our gut, for the bacteria in our gut. And then also eating fermented foods, things like yogurt and kefir and sauerkraut contain those healthy bacteria. So again, those recommendations for what does a healthy diet look like overall, whether we're taking the lens of what's good for the gut microbiome, or what's good for heart health in terms of what's rich in these flavonoids, there's so much overlap here that comes back to those basic recommendations.
Fascinating time as we learn more about the importance of what we stuff in our mouth, and it's something we really need to pay attention to. I appreciate you being here to help us with that.
Thank you for the